Welcome to Reddit family. Ever felt like your family turned their back on you when you needed them most? This story is from Reddit, about a man who faced the years of betrayal from the people he loved and found the courage to walk away. It's a tale of heartbreak, courage, and finding true happiness for anyone who's ever felt alone. Stick around, because this one's about healing in ways you might not expect. Let's call him David. He's Pitugu, a quiet man who spent most of his life in a small fishing town in Maine. The kind of place where the air smells like salt and the winters are long and cold. David grew up in a big family. 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and parents who ran a local diner. I was the middle child, the one who always kept the peace, fixing arguments between his siblings, helping his dad with the diner after school. Even when his hands were raw from scrubbing dishes, David loved his family deeply. But he always felt like the odd one out. His brothers were loud and athletic, his sisters charming and popular, while David was the quiet one, the one who'd rather sit by the docks with a book than join the town's clam festival. The cracks in David's family started showing when he was in his 30s. His parents passed away within a year of each other, leaving the diner to all 6 siblings to manage together. David saw it as a chance to keep the family close. He poured his heart into the place, working late nights to balance the books, fixing the leaky roof himself, even dipping into his savings to cover repairs. But his siblings didn't see it the same way. His oldest brother, Tom, wanted to sell the diner and split the money. His sisters agreed, saying they needed the cash for their own families. David begged them to reconsider. The diner was their parents' legacy, a piece of their childhood. "We can make it work," he said at a family meeting, his voice steady but pleading. Tom just laughed. "You're too sentimental. David, it's a sinking ship. Let it go." The others nodded, and David felt his heart sink. They voted to sell, 5-1. David was outvoted, and the diner was gone. The betrayal didn't stop there. After the sale, David expected his siblings to at least share the profits fairly. They'd made a decent amount, enough to give each of them a cushion. But when the money was divided, David's share was half of everyone else's. He confronted Tom, his voice shaking. "Why am I getting less? I put in more than anyone." Tom shrugged, not even looking at him. "You don't have a family. David, you don't need as much." The words cut deep. David was single, sure, but he'd given up so much for the diner. For them, his sisters didn't say a word, just looked away, and his younger brothers mumbled excuses. That night, David sat in his small apartment above the town's hardware store, staring at the check in his hand, feeling like he'd lost more than just the diner. He'd lost his family. For years, David tried to keep the peace, hoping things would get better. He'd show up to family gatherings, forcing a smile as his siblings bragged about their new cars, their kids' fancy schools, all paid for with the dinner money. They never asked about David's life, never thanked him for the years he'd carried the diner on his back. The final straw came at a Christmas dinner 3 years ago. David had spent weeks building a wooden rocking horse for his niece, carving it by hand, something he'd learned from his dad. He brought it to the party, proud to give something meaningful, but when he handed it to his sister, she barely looked at it. "Oh, that's quaint," she said, setting it aside to gush over Tom's new watch. Later, David overheard Tom talking to their younger brother. "David's always been a pushover," Tom said, laughing. "He'll never leave us. He's got nowhere else to go." David stood in the hallway, the laughter echoing in his ears, and something inside him broke. That night, David made a decision. He went home, packed a single bag, and left a note on the kitchen table. "I'm done. Don't look for me." He didn't take much. Just his clothes, a few books, and the old pocket knife his dad had given him. He drove south, not sure where he was going, just knowing he couldn't stay. He ended up in a small coastal town in North Carolina, a place he'd never heard of, with wide beaches and quiet streets. He rented a tiny cottage near the water, using the last of his diner money to get by. For the first few weeks, he barely left the house, the weight of his family's betrayal sitting heavy on his chest. His phone buzzed with texts from his siblings. First curious, then angry, then pleading. "Where are you? You can't just leave like this. We're family." "David." He didn't reply. He blocked their numbers, one by one, and let the silence settle in. At first, The loneliness was suffocating. David would walk the beach at sunrise, the cold sand under his feet, wondering if he'd made a mistake. But slowly, things started to change. He got a job at a local bookstore, a small place with creaky floors and the smell of old paper. The owner, a kind woman named Margaret, saw something in David. A quiet strength, she called it. She'd invite him for coffee after closing, and they'd talk about books, life, the way the ocean looked at dusk. Through Margaret, David met others, a fisherman named Carl, who taught him how to cast a net, a painter named Lisa, who showed him how to mix colors. They became his friends, not out of obligation, but because they genuinely liked him. For the first time, David felt seen. A year after he left, David started volunteering at a community center, teaching kids how to carve wood, like his dad had taught him. One boy, a 10-year-old named Sam, reminded David of himself. Quiet, a little lost, but eager to learn. Sam's mom, a single mother named Clara, thanked David one day with tears in her eyes. "You've given him something to be proud of," she said. David smiled, his throat tight. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear that. Over time, he and Clara grew close. She'd invite him over for dinner, and they'd sit on her porch after Sam went to bed, talking about everything and nothing. Clara didn't know about David's past at first, but when he finally told her, she took his hand and said, "You didn't deserve that, but I'm glad you're here." David felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. Now, 3 years after he left Maine, David's life looks nothing like it used to. He and Clara are together, not married, but happy in their quiet way. Sam calls him Uncle David, a title that makes David's heart swell every time he hears it. The cottage by the beach is home now, filled with books, wooden carvings, and the sound of Clara's laughter. David still thinks about his family sometimes, especially on holidays. He heard through an old friend that Tom's business went under, and his sisters are struggling after bad investments. They've tried reaching out through mutual friends, asking David to come back, saying they're sorry. But David doesn't feel the pull to return. He's found his family, not the one he was born into, but the one he chose. Last week, he walked the beach with Clara and Sam, the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold. Sam ran ahead, chasing a crab, and Clara squeezed David's hand. "You okay?" she asked. David nodded, a real smile on his face. "I'm more than okay," he said, and he meant it. David's story shows that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the one you're meant to keep. He walked away from years of betrayal and found a happiness he never thought possible. It's a reminder that courage isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when to let go and build something new. What do you think? Was David right to cut ties? Or should he have given his family another chance? Have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear what you think. These stories connect us, showing us we're not alone in our struggles. If you enjoyed this tale, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out. I'm here every day with new tales from Reddit and beyond, so stick around. See you next time.